In this video, we'll learn about separable verbs in German. But before we do, we're going to think about separable verbs in English. It's always worth comparing your target language with your mother tongue. And English has a sort of separable verb which might help us to understand what the German is doing. In English, there are three types of verbs which come close to separable verbs in German, but are not quite the same. Let's look at these three different examples. The first one is understand. Understand is made up of two parts. The first part is under, a prefix, and the second part is stand. But they actually always stay together. They never separate. For example, you say, I understand this, and the two parts remain together in the one word. The second example is the verb go through. Notice that go and through this time have a space between them because through is a preposition which is combined with the verb go to give it a special flavor. When we use this, for example, I am going through this, the words stay separated, but they're still next to each other. The third example comes closest to the German, pass up. To pass up, for example, an opportunity. When you say, I can't pass this up, notice that pass, the first part of the verb, and up, the second part of the verb, are separated, and there is a word in between. This is what we're talking about in German, where verbs split up and go to different parts of the sentence. How do separable verbs work in German? Let's look at the example of aussehen. This verb has two parts. The first part is the prefix, aus. It means out, and you'll see it on lots of different verbs. The second part is the stem, sehen. That's actually a verb by itself. It means to see. But when you combine it with aus, all of a sudden you have a new verb, and it means to look like. Often I encourage my students to write separable verbs with a slash in between the prefix and the stem to remind themselves that it is separable. When you use the verb aussehen in a sentence, often you separate these two different parts and they go to different locations in the sentence. For example, du siehst krank aus. You look sick. Notice that the verb sehen has turned into siehst, and it is conjugated. That means it has the correct ending for du, and it is in second position, like the verb has to be in every German sentence. Secondly, notice that the prefix aus has been pushed to the end of the clause or the sentence. It is as far as possible away from the stem in the sentence. Before we look at some more examples, we need to ask the question, how do you know if a verb is separable in German? There are three ways. Firstly, you could learn it with the meaning. When you first memorize the meaning of the verb aussehen, for example, you might make a note that it is separable by including a slash. Secondly, you could learn all of the separable prefixes. It is true that there are some prefixes that can be both inseparable and separable, but for the most part, the two are very different. Inseparable prefixes include ones like be, ge, emp, ent, miss, fer, and zer, while separable prefixes include ones like ab, an, auf, aus, bei, mit, nach, statt, vor, zu, fort, los, nieder, vorbei, weg, zurück, zusammen, fest, and teil. Thirdly, you could listen to the stress in the verb. In a separable verb, like aussehen, the stress is laid on the prefix. What does that mean? When you say it, you say aussehen, not aussehen. The aus is the element of the verb that is stressed. And that means that it is a separate element which can be detached. For example, ich sehe blöd aus. I look stupid. In an inseparable verb like verstehen, the ver is not stressed, but rather the stem stehen. So when you make a sentence like ich verstehe nichts, I understand nothing, the ver and the stehen stick closely together. We also need to know, when do separable verbs separate? This is important because there are some contexts in which the two elements, the prefix and the stem, actually stay together. The examples we've looked at so far are in the present tense, in which they do separate. Here's another example. Wir gehen heute Abend aus. We're going out this evening. In the past perfect tense, which is the most common past tense in German, they do not separate as separate words. For example, Wir sind gestern ausgegangen. We went out yesterday. Now it's true that there's a GE in between, but that GE really still belongs to the gehen, and it's one word. After modal verbs, they also do not separate. For example, wir dürfen heute Abend ausgehen. This means we're allowed to go out this evening. The modal verb sends the second verb to the end of the sentence and leaves it in its infinitive form, ausgehen, with no separation between the prefix and the stem. The final example is the simple past tense, which is the less common past tense in German, but also important in some contexts. For example, wir gingen gestern aus. We went out yesterday. In this case, the stem takes the simple past form and the prefix simply goes to the end of the sentence like the present tense. Finally, here are some more examples of separable verbs in the present tense. Ankommen means to arrive, and here's an example of its being used. Sie kommt gleich an. She's just about to arrive. She's arriving soon. Notice that the prefix an has gone to the end of the sentence, whereas the stem kommen has been conjugated with a T ending because she is in charge of the verb. Anrufen means to call or ring up. Rufst du deine Mutter an? Are you calling your mother? This time it's a question. And so the stem, which is the conjugated part, rufst, will go right to the start of the sentence, as the verb does in an open-ended question. But the prefix, once again, an, will go right to the end of the sentence. Aufstehen means to get up. Morgen stehe ich 7 auf. Tomorrow I'm getting up at 7. Auf, the prefix, is at the end of the sentence, whereas stehe, the conjugated verb, is in second position, as it always is, unless it's an open-ended question. Zuhören means to listen. Hört einfach nicht zu. He's simply not listening. Hört is in second position, whereas zu, the prefix, has been placed right at the end of the sentence. Mitspielen means to join in a game. Ihr spielt nie mit. You guys never join in. Spielt, the conjugated stem, is in second position and the prefix mit is at the end of the sentence. Fernsehen, to watch TV. Ich sehe gern fern. I like watching TV. Sehe, the conjugated stem, is in second position and fern is at the end of the sentence. Finally, aufräumen means to clean up or to tidy. Sie räumen selten auf. They rarely clean up. Räumen is in second position as the conjugated stem of the verb, and auf, the prefix, is at the end of the sentence. Notice that if we had any other pieces of information, whether it's time or other people we're doing the action with, or frequency, or any other information, it's going to go in between those two elements. The prefix in all of these sentences goes right to the end of the sentence no matter what.